It may not be October in high school, but it's a homecoming no matter how you slice it. Bruch Bochy and the Texas Rangers are back in town, and so we got an opportunity to talk to one of Bruce's former players, George Kontos, here on 95.7 The Game. George working for NBC Sports Bay Area as a great pre- and post-game analyst. George, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, fellas. How you guys doing?
We're doing really well, and Alan and I, it's Alan Stiles in here with Dan Dibley. We were talking about feelings and emotions because we're sensitive people, George. We're not just all punches in the arm and, tough guys and the rest of it. But what are you feeling as the old skipper comes back to town?
I'll tell you what, I think everyone kind of feels the same way, right? It's very, very bittersweet because of all the memories that we've had with Boch at the helm. 3 championships in the San Francisco era of Giants baseball, and he was the guy leading the charge for all 3 of them. It's great to see him still in baseball, and I know that everyone still wishes him well. And it's, again, seeing him come into Oracle Park to face his old team in another uniform is, I think, difficult for most people.
Well, George, the manager on the other side, the Giants manager now, Gabe Kapler, it's been tough for him just because Bruch Bochy is such a legend. Do you think it's been fair how Gabe Kapler has been evaluated since taking the helm after Bruch Bochy's departure?
I think that with Gabe coming in, whoever that would have been, anybody, and Gabe happened to be the guy coming in after a guy like Bruch Bochy leaves is going to be difficult. You're going to be already behind the 8 ball, so to speak. You're going to be kind of judged a little bit unfairly, and Gabe's done obviously a really good job. They've had some really good teams for the Giants. You go back to 2021 and what they did and set the franchise record. But when you win championships and when you have a guy who's going to the Hall of Fame, it's a little bit of just an unfair position to be in, no matter who it is, no matter what's going on. When you replace a guy that has meant so much to the city, it's just a little bit of a behind the 8 ball situation.
2-time champion George Kontos here on 95.7 The Game. Do you have any favorite memories or maybe a vignette you'd like to share of your time playing for Bruch Bochy?
I have a couple great memories. I have one very, very specific one. In general, Boch always had this very calm demeanor about him. Whether we were up by 10, whether we were down by 10, or whether we were in a tie game in the 8th or 9th inning, you'd always look at Boch at that top step of the dugout where he always would sit, and you always felt this kind of calm confidence that we're either not done yet, or we're not out of it, or we have more work to do. And when the bullpens were back on the fields and the guys in the bullpen, we'd have our little area right down the stairs there. We would always be kind of peeking our heads up, and everyone was up on the top step as well. Whenever you would look to the end of the dugout and see Boch there, it kind of just was a calming factor. So he had that calming demeanor over all the guys that were, in the clubhouse, on the roster, in the dugout, whatever it was. But after we won the 2012 World Series, I always got to the field very early. And on parade day, I did the same thing. I got to the field a little early, and I was in the trainer's room, and Boch walked in. And we had probably a 15 or 20-minute little powwow, and he said to me, he goes, "George, I don't think you realize what we just did." And this was obviously when we came back and won 3 in Cincinnati, won 3 in a row against St. Louis, and swept the Tigers, obviously. But he goes, "You're going to sit there at some point, and it's going to be maybe 6 months from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever it is, and it's going to sink in how impressive, how unbelievable this postseason run was for us." And that happened to me as soon as I retired. And I came back and I had hung up my spikes, and I was moving on to the media side of things, and I sat there and I kind of evaluated everything that happened in my career, and what came out was just Boch's words resonating 10 years later. And that was probably one of my greatest Boch moments, was that conversation. And I don't know when it's going to happen for you, but at some point you're going to realize what we did here. And I had it 10 years later, and that was pretty special.
George, Bochy is known as this old school classic guy in terms of how he plays the game and coaches the game. But I do think it gets a little undersold as far as his ability to adapt. Do you think he's adapted well to the new age of baseball and the analytics and things like that?
I think that Boch did a little bit of that, always. I think that we always had what the guys' splits were against righties and lefties, and we always had what a reliever or whoever was facing against the next 3 guys in the lineup. We always kind of had that. And what Boch's greatest asset was and still is obviously, is his ability to manage people and to get the most out of the guys that he has on his squad. And he would never put you in a position where he thought that you weren't comfortable or you weren't ready. He knows the game, obviously, but he knows his players, and he makes everybody feel comfortable in the position that they're in. And that's why guys love to play for him, is because he puts you in positions to succeed. If you're having a bad day or a bad couple days, and I know this for I've had this many times. I'd go out there, I'd give up a run or a couple runs on a couple straight days. Boch would put me right back in the game. He'd put me right back on the horse, and he wants you to get back in that good mental state so he can use you in the role that he wants to use you in. And he's just had the ability to get the best out of his players throughout his entire career.
George Kontos played for Bruch Bochy for 6 years with the Giants, joining us here on 95.7 The Game. Now George, an NBC Bay Area Giants pre- and post-game analyst. How much does Bochy's demeanor help him now in this era of social media and overreaction and all the rest of it, and his ability to your point, remain calm and just continue to keep players calm as well with their ups and downs?
I think it's such a huge, Boch is one of those guys that is kind of timeless, right? He's an old school guy. He knows the game. He plays kind of chess when everybody else can sometimes be playing checkers. But look, Chris Young over there with the Rangers, that he sought him out. He wanted Boch. He wanted a guy who was a player's guy, who was going to be able to get the most out of his players. And you saw guys sign over there because Boch was the guy who was going to be leading the helm, and that just speaks volumes about what he has done throughout his career. I mean, there's not that I've ever heard of or spoken to or anything. Not one person has ever said that they didn't enjoy their time playing under Bruch Bochy.
George, I think the narrative is that Gabe Kapler and Bruch Bochy are so different. Do you see any similarities between the two?
The ability to control a clubhouse, I think, is very important, if not one of the most important things that you can have. Team chemistry, that's what we talked about for the 3 championship runs that we had with the Giants in 10, 12, and 14, is we were never the best team on paper, but we always had guys that pulled for one another. And I think that this Giants team that we've seen the last few years, you have that same kind of style. And I think that you have to give credit to the staff, Gabe, Farhan, everybody, for putting those players in place and to have that kind of camaraderie and team chemistry that these guys have. If you have some outliers in the clubhouse, that can be a little bit of a detriment, and they don't seem to have that. So you have to give Gabe and Farhan credit for what they've been able to do in the wake of what Bruch Bochy's exit left.
Is it more difficult the way Gabe and Farhan are doing it as opposed to the way you guys did it during the championship run? Because you pretty much had a starting rotation. You had bullpen roles with the core forward, the back end, and position guys pretty much knew when they would be in the lineup. Yet the Kapler-Zaidi regime has been players in, players out, players up, players down. Does that make it more difficult on the skipper?
I think you have to answer a lot more questions because you're compared to your predecessors. And whenever people talk about the San Francisco Giants teams of the present and even the last few years, you're always comparing everything to championship caliber teams, right? I was raised and came up in the generation of baseball where you didn't have the righty-lefty lineups and the platoons and all that. I had the kind of lineups where you knew that you were playing every day, and if you needed a breather for a day or two, you'd get that. But you were the whatever position, and the hot hand was always playing, regardless of whether it was a righty or a lefty. They have decided and chosen to go this path with the analytics and what the numbers say, and the Giants have obviously responded very well to it. I came up in the game a little bit differently. It's not what I would do, but it's working, and you have to buy into what's working. So it's one of those kind of catch-22s where a lot of people are like, hey, this isn't how we've done it, but right now it's working. So, that's kind of where we're at, I feel like.
We're talking to George Kontos, 2-time World Series champ. George, as a relief pitcher yourself, what are your thoughts on the opener situation that the Giants are trying to do or are doing? Do you think it can last? Do you think it works? What are your feelings on it?
Well, I mean, the numbers so far say that it works. I think they're 15-6 with the opener. So the numbers have been there. I've never really kind of experienced that. The opener came in, I think, or was prevalent, a lot more prevalent the year that I kind of hung him up, or the year that I was not in the big leagues. But it's an interesting kind of. I understand where the thought goes into having the opener, where you want the starting pitcher to not face somebody through a third time through the order. But if you can get your starting pitcher to go 5 innings, and then you bring a guy like myself in, that was my role. I was the guy that would come in the 5th or 6th earlier in my career and get the ball to those late inning guys. That would be my fight back on not using the opener. But they've been doing a great job with it. You have a bunch of guys who have done really well in that role and who have embraced that they are going to use the opener. And the only thing that I think is different is that you are having to get your routine going a little bit earlier if you're that person who's going to be the opener. So it's one of those things where they've implemented it. They're doing a great job. I mean, we're even hearing talks of them using that potentially in the playoffs. So they've bought into it, and it seems to be working.
Yeah, George Kontos here on 95.7 The Game. To use it in the playoffs, you have to get to the playoffs. It seems simplistic, but they've dropped 4 of 5, and quite a gauntlet schedule-wise upcoming. How critical is this series to set a tone for the next month, which features only playoff caliber teams?
Oh man, I mean, these are the games that we talk about in April and May, right? I mean, we're in August and September now, and you're going to be in a race, in a division race, and in a wild card race where all of these games are important, and you're going to be facing good teams. And this team specifically is one of the best teams in the big leagues this year. I think they're probably some favorites in the AL. It is very important to kind of win series. You're not going to win every game, but you need to win series and win more games than you lose. Because the Dodgers have upgraded themselves. They have Trinan and Buehler coming back in September, and they're only going to get better. So you have to win these games, and you have to win series.
Yeah, big series against Texas and Tampa, and then Atlanta and Philly and more Atlanta. It's going to be fun over the next month. George, one more before we let you go, and it's about managerial styles and the playoffs. Does the Bruch Bochy from the gut, and I know it's an oversimplification sensation of sorts, but does the from the gut style work better in the playoffs, or can the spreadsheet approach work just as fine in a short series?
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, I think that we saw what the spreadsheet said, and this is, you said from the gut, and this is the first thing that popped into my mind. But in Game 6 of the World Series with the Tampa Bay Rays and the Los Angeles Dodgers, they pulled Blake Snell to not face the top of the lineup for the third time when they were 0 for 6 with 5 strikeouts. And they brought in Nick Anderson, who gave up, I think, a couple runs immediately. And Mookie Betts said it right after the game. He said, as soon as we saw Nick Anderson running in through the bullpen, the momentum had shifted and we felt like we were going to win the game. So the gut reaction, I think, is very important. The numbers are also very important. I mean, there's so many things to take into consideration, but in the playoffs, when there's no tomorrow, there's no let's see what happens a week from now, you have to make the right decision now. I think the gut reaction plays a much more significant role in the month of October.
Might have been a gut move to let Bumgarner get 16 outs in that Game 7 as well, huh, George?
Hey, the gut moves have paid out in the Giants era, at least.
George Kontos, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the series, and say hi to Boch for us.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, George. George Kontos, NBC Sports Bay Area, pre and post, former Giant reliever, pitched a ton in 2012 on that run to the World Series, also on the club in 2014.